Summer is upon us in Johannesburg. It's a glorious day. The sand deck at the Sun Hotel in Sandton it's usually packed. We've snuck in quite early on in the morning, and why have we done so? Because it is champagne time, and Philipponnat, which is a brand we're about to learn a little more about, in the company of what would appear to be a younger and slightly better looking version of Timothy Chalamet. But it is not Timothy Chalamet, it is in fact Francois. Welcome, lovely to have you back in South Africa here a couple of years ago and happily returning.
Yes, happily returning and with nice compliments, so thank you. It's a good start of the day.
Now, you are a very young gentleman. Your brand is certainly not. You've got history going back 500 years or thereabouts. Tell me a little bit about this Philipponnat story.
So that is correct. So the brand is a little younger than the story of the family, obviously. But the family, we date back the start of our family tradition of wine growing and winemaking in Champagne in the year 1522, when my ancestor purchased its first vineyard in the village of Haï, which is right in the very historic heart of Champagne. And so since then, and up until me, basically, 16 generations of Philipponnat have followed, continuously perpetuating that family tradition.
So that's unbroken. It's been the family all the way since then.
Well, yeah, the brand in itself was only incorporated in 1910 by my great-grandfather and his brother on the foundations, if you will, of the family estate and tradition. We're talking, it's over 500 years of family tradition. What we're celebrating is the fact that all these generations have been in Champagne, in the same place, doing the same job under various forms. But,
I have a feeling that if we were to cut you very delicately, it would be champagne and not blood that comes out. It's very much part of your DNA.
Let's try. That's how we make rosé.
Look, given your family history, I would take it because it is most impressive. Tell us a bit about where Philipponnat is now. We have a lot in South Africa that are the very big, the very commercial brands. This is not really one of those.
No, it's not. We're not one of these brands. So we are way smaller. We're amongst what we call the houses. So meaning we do get some supplies from outsourced growers to make our blends. Among the houses, we're a small one. Some like to use the word boutique house. I don't like the word boutique so much. I think boutique is a cheap hotel that tries to look nice. That's my take on that. So today, we're a brand that rather produces very vinous and gastronomic champagnes with a majority of Pinot Noir in the blends, which helps in reaching more complexity, fruitness, and vinosity. And so our customers are rather gastronomic restaurants, beautiful hotels like where we are. Our wines are consumed by people that have some kind of knowledge. So the people who come to Philipponnat come for a very specific reason, which is what's inside the bottle. So we like to say that the marketing is inside the bottle.
I'm interested in your use of the word gastronomique. In South Africa, we often tend to use bubbles with a champagne or cup classique, or if we're really struggling, Prosecco, to have a toast, to do some celebration, to open a meal, perhaps close one, but not always so often in tandem with the meal. In using the term gastronomique, is this champagne that I can be looking at to accompany the dishes of a fine meal?
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do. I like to say that we make champagne that are meant to be drunk seated, meaning to be paired with food. The Pinot Noir helps in doing that. That does not mean you can't have it just enjoying the sun at the aperitif, but we think they have enough body and texture in intensity to be paired with food and to be tasted throughout the whole meal, from the starter to the dessert, provided you have a sweeter champagne.
The use of Pinot Noir gives us an indication of what we can expect to come from the champagne that you produce. For people, particularly in South Africa, who perhaps aren't so familiar with the range of champagnes beyond those very big commercial names we often see, what else is it for you that makes Philipponnat stand out?
Well, I think Pinot Noir is one of these things because really I like to say that when talking about Philipponnat, the first thing that should come to your mind is Pinot Noir. And even though Pinot Noir is the predominant grape variety in Champagne, by far the most planted, not many really highlight it and showcase it. It's not the trendiest one. You hear way more about Blanc de Blanc than you hear about Blanc de Noir. Philipponnat, the star the signature cuvée really is our Blanc de Noir. So I think that's one thing that makes us different than other bigger commercial brands. Another thing that makes us different is that some kind of handcrafted artisanal approach that we have to winemaking. So we are a house, but we have methods that are closer to one of a smaller grower where we have utter control over everything we do. So we really do work at every step of the winemaking process with methods that are as artisanal as they get, basically. We try to.
Now, I'm not sure if it's because you are a near aristocratic member of the champagne community or because the champagne itself is very valuable, but you did arrive with a rather tall French bodyguard called Helvet, who's protecting the both of you. He's protecting a range of bubbles, and when you did sit down, you said that this looked like the perfect day for champagne. My suggestion was that it's always the perfect time for champagne, but right. This is particularly good, so I think trying some bubbles might be the way to go.
Yes, I mean, as you said, it's always a good thing. Everybody knows that saying by Lily Bollinger that she basically says that whatever her mood, she wants to drink champagne, and other than this, she doesn't want to drink champagne unless she's thirsty. So basically, I think that sums it up pretty well. A story I like to tell is that gives an example for that. One day on a regular Monday or Tuesday evening during COVID, very dull times, I went home. I was going back home from work, stopped by at my parents' home. My father was there alone. My mother must have been somewhere. And he's like, okay, do you want to stay for dinner? I say, yes. And he tells me, do you want to crack a bottle of champagne? I say, why not? I go in the fridge and I say, I'm sorry, I don't think we're drinking champagne tonight. And he goes, why not? And I tell him, well, because there's only a bottle of Clos des Goisses, our prestige cuvée, vintage 1985, that's in the fridge. So we're not drinking champagne tonight. And he says, well, open it, it's okay. I say, no, there's no good reason, there's no special occasion to open that kind of bottle. He says, it's chilled, it's a good enough occasion. So since then, I try to apply this to my life. If you're waiting for a celebration to drink champagne, you might never drink it in these times. So whether it's sunny, it's a good reason, but if it were raining, it would be a good reason as well to open a bottle of champagne.
I love that philosophy. Coming up next, it's the chance to drink some exquisite and quite exclusive French champagne on a glorious day in Johannesburg. There is really no bad time to be drinking champagne. We've established that quite conclusively, but when the skies are blue, the temperature is in the high 20s, and pretty much everybody else is stuck in an office, it makes drinking champagne all the more welcome. And imagine even more so when you've come out from France, you're heading into winter. Winter in France is a little different to summer in South Africa. Yeah. This is probably the good alternative. I'd imagine the rest of the family is saying, Francois, please stop sending us photos of South African sunshine drinking champagne.
Well, you want to know what's fun about that is the only photo, it's actually a video I sent them since I got here, is of that nice pouring rain we got on on Monday afternoon, so which is also something that I like, but it's true that the weather is currently dreadful in Champagne, like 5-6 degrees, homogeneous gray sky, so I enjoy the sun. I'm this kind of guy.
Now, of course, that weather is fundamentally important because it is what shapes what comes into our glass and allows you and your family to continue this 502-year legacy. Yes. Of the family Philipponnat. And we've got a selection. There are a number of different offerings that you have, but we've got a couple here in particular. Let's start with the first of these. Introduce me to what we're drinking and why this is something people should be looking at.
So the two actually that we're going to have are the same one with a slight difference. So they're part of our non-vintage range, which is still called Royal Reserve. That's the name of the cuvée, even though, spoiler alert, it's going to change as of next year, more or less. Depends on depletion of the stocks. So the non-vintage cuvées at Philipponnat are made in a very specific way since the beginning. Since when we started making this cuvée in 1946, we've always kept aside a part of the blend to age for a year in oak, food, and barrels, so that the following year we reincorporate the wines of the harvest. That like this, every year since 1946, we've refreshed the base, the reserve wine as it is, with younger wine, thus creating a perpetual motion and what we call in Champagne, réserve perpétuelle, so perpetual reserve. So the blend of that cuvée is a perpetual reserve, so Solera-inspired method that's been going from 1946 up to 2019, which is the latest harvest that was incorporated in the blend now. So you're tasting a bit of history, basically the addition of all the vintages from 1946 to 2019, even though let's be honest, the 1946 is probably by far diluted today and has no impact whatsoever on the taste of the wine.
To me, that's one of the great art forms of winemaking, creating your non-vintage, because you have to have this style that speaks to the house, and yet you're taking wine from different years, and somehow you manage to craft all of those together and know that if I'm opening a bottle 5 years ago and I'm opening a bottle today, there might not be an actual vintage on the label. I'm still drinking pretty much the same wine.
Well, yes and no. Yes, in a way that's precisely as you put it perfectly right. We're trying to work on a style so that the customers of Philipponnat, when they go back to this product, they recognize it. They recognize the style, the signature in a way. Then nature makes it that, you know, every vintage is different, so it has an impact. So we can try to mitigate that a little bit. But at Philipponnat, the use of the reserve process is not so much here to even out the quality, the taste of the wine, rather than to make of this limitation that we have to turn it into something positive in terms of quality. So we use the reserve as a way more to progressively concentrate even more, create deeper and more profound wines and more complex wines to have something that would be very, very intense and yet fresh at the same time, because there's some kind of inertia that happens when you add fresh vintage every year. The wine, kind of paradoxically, as it ages, gets even fresher. So here, that's what we try to do. That's what's the hardest to do. It's way harder to do more volumetric cuvée, even though we're not making outstanding volumes at Philipponnat of a non-vintage cuvée, than it is to do a single plot cuvée that you sell way more easily. So it's complicated. We're actually more proud of these cuvées than of the others. That does not mean we don't like the others, but this one are the more intricate to produce and to create. And recently, in the past year, we've received a lot of accolades and acclaim for our work, with many very influential magazines and ranking it at the top of their list as the best non-vintage cuvées from champagne houses. So that's La Revue du Vin de France, Decanter magazine, Wine Spectator, and the Wine Enthusiast. So that's 3 important magazines putting it up there. So it's only journalists' opinion, but when there's 4 of them, you're happy because you think you're doing something right. So, yeah.
You certainly are. The freshness you mentioned is very much there, but also that richness, that intensity. You mentioned the Pinot Noir earlier. I'm guessing that's what's driving a lot of the body, a lot of the soul and the essence of this wine.
Well, it is. So the blend of this cuvée is usually around 2/3 Pinot Noir and 1/3 Chardonnay. That comes here to balance the ripeness of the Pinot Noir. We only use first press ripe Pinot Noir, so that goes in the direction of creating very forward, enticing, fruity wines. And then there's also an extended lease aging of a minimum of 36 months. So that's 3 times basically more than the legal minimum in Champagne. So that's also something else that adds to the texture, to the matter, to the body of the wine. And then you mentioned it, you were spot on, freshness, because at Philipponnat, everywhere there's intensity, we try to put freshness to balance it, because we want the wine to be easy to digest and to drink, because if your glass stays full, well, it means you're doing something wrong. So we need to get working now.
It pairs beautifully with South African Sunshine, and it is one of 2. You mentioned that these are almost the same. There is a small yet important difference. What is that difference? What contrasts these 2?
So they're the same blend. So everything I just said about the wine is the same. There's just one tiny difference, which is the dosage. So, you know, the sugar we add after the disgorgement of the bottle, when we remove the lees from the bottle. The first one has a dosage of 8 grams per liter. And the second one, the one you're currently tasting, is a non-dosé. So by definition, no dosage, 0, but with using the same blend. So it's very interesting. I like saying that these 2 are like identical twins dressed differently, in a sense that they have the same DNA, everything is the same, but you put a pink dress on one, a blue dress on the other, and one will, the complexion, the tan of one will come out easier, and the other one, maybe the blue eyes or whatever. So it just brings out different quality from each of them, and good versatility of the wine that you can use it depending on your mood. So I just got married this summer. I couldn't make a choice. I had the two of them. Yeah, thank you. Cheers to that.
I mean, there's absolutely no overt sweetness to that first one. Don't let 8 grams suggest that you're going to be drinking something that's nudging towards anything like demi-sec. Not at all. But then you drink this one, and it is bone dry, and that's a style I really enjoy. It's been passed, it's linear, it's a really beautiful glass to drink, especially on a hot African day.
That's correct.
I think this is a cracker.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Where are the oysters?
I shall put in a word to Miguel to send them over. Just before we let you go, this is just part of it. Very quickly, because you've said I can't taste anything else unless I come and visit you at Philipponnat, so I'm going to have to come and do that.
Yes,
what am I looking forward to from the rest of the range as the pick of what you have to offer?
Well, I think all our range, there's a red line that's, as I mentioned, intensity and freshness. So you will always recognize the Philipponnat style, no matter the blend. And then we do have quite an comprehensive and extended portfolio and range. I think what's made our fame and what people know about Philipponnat is the Clos des Goisses. So that's maybe something you've heard of, because it was the very first single vineyard cuvée to ever been produced in Champagne. It's an iconic plot that's very singular because it combines 3 parameters in a very extreme expression that are a very steep slope, 45 degrees, facing due south, so very warm, almost as warm as the sun deck at the Centon Hotel here in Johannesburg, with a pure choke subsoil that balances it once again with minerality and freshness. So some would say that is the pick of the range, and then I leave it to people's taste. I think they're all beautiful. Very often I have people who ask me, and which one's your favorite? I hate that question. Usually I answer, you have children? Which one's your favorite? And then people tell you.
Sometimes that's easier to answer than you might think.
Usually, I mean, I don't have children, so I don't know. Maybe it seems like you have. Maybe it depends on the days, if I've understood correctly.
It does indeed. Francois, thank you. This has been absolutely delightful.
Thank you, Dan.
I will come and visit you in France.
Please do.
And if you want one final reason to be drinking Champagne Philipponnat, it clearly keeps you young, because Francois turns 86 next month, and he's not looking a day over 17. Cheers.
Yeah.
Welcome to Not Just Dan Really Likes Wine with Normal Goodfellows, but also a rather busy afternoon on the deck at Marble. You can hear the Rosebank traffic pulling through at lunchtime. Thankfully, we're not stuck in traffic. Instead, we're about to jump into lunch. But before we do, the chance to hang out with one of, I think we could almost call him one of the modern greats of Bordeaux wine. Although when you hear the accent, Martin, there's almost something that doesn't quite sound French when you hear you for the first time.
Yeah, and an Englishman with a Polish name living in Bordeaux. It's a little bit odd. A guy called Windsor Dobin, who you may have heard of, writes for Gourmet Traveller in Australia. He once wrote me up as an Englishman with a Polish name living in Bordeaux making wine in Australia. Well, I am a bit of a hybrid, mongrel, whatever you want to call it. Don't have the classic background. I can claim to be, though, the only Englishman in Pomerol today. And if anybody wants to argue with that, well, I'm the only Polishman, the only Pole in Pomerol.
It's a wine world that I'm very, very much part of. Before we get to that wine world now, let's look back at how you ended up in it, because go back to when you were 14, I think you were making wine out of elderberries and mucking about. So there was clearly something on the horizon that said wine could be for me.
Always had a complete fascination with alcohol, basically. My dad didn't really drink too much. My dad was a Polish cavalry officer and ended up coming to England after 5 years in prisoner of war camp at the end of the war, and well, a bit more than that, 48. And he came from a big farming family. Very quickly established a small farm, and so I grew up on the farm. And Dad didn't drink very much. Mum didn't drink, but there was this bottle of sherry in the cupboard that the priest used to have when he came round every 6 months to bless the house and hold his hand out. And I figured at 10 years old that if the priest was doing it, it must be pretty good. So that's where I started, pulling the cork out of the old Harvey's Bristol Cream and having a bit of a swig. the fortune or the misfortune was that guy I worked with in 1981, a couple of years before I started my business, had bought a property called Chateaux in Entre-deux-Mers in Bordeaux. A pretty important and famous property for Entre-deux-Mers, and with a 1,000-year history. I didn't see him for years. He called me up in 1995 out of the blue and said, hey, I'm here, and I understand you're interested in wine, and we're looking for a few new investors because we've got all these wonderful things going on, and how about it? And it was like, how much do you need? And a year later, it was, how much more can I put in? And then I go down there, and he says, we'd like you to be a director. And by the way, we're having a bit of a problem with the cash flow because the French authorities have taken too much tax from us, and so we need a couple of 100,000. And but you get it back in 6 weeks' time. Hey, I'm your man. Well,
still waiting on that.
I took the property over, and I'm running this search practice out of London. We have international offices. We built a recruitment group, an outsourcing, a big group of companies around the world. I'm spending half my time in New York, in Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and I'm starting to work in Bordeaux. I'm flying down to Bordeaux. I'm doing 1-2 nights there a week. I'm in London. I'm on the airplane to New York. I'm on the airplane. It just got completely ridiculous. And as Dan knows, I also started a wine venture in Australia in 2002, and that's a bit of a commitment. So I was doing everything. And Nicolette, my wife, said to me one night at 3 o'clock in the morning when the phone rang, and it's the resident winemaker in Australia, says, "This has to stop. Your phone never stops. You never stop." And I thought, oh, okay, but that's how it is. I slipped in, fortune or misfortune.
You have 2 properties at the moment. We're going to taste some of that wine in a moment. Before we do, though, tell me about the previous Bordeaux ownership and selling it off to a rather well-known and reasonably successful Chinese gentleman.
2015, so I'd been there for like 14, 15 years. I'd been an investor for 20 years. And I was about 90-95% through my journey. I replanted 45 hectares. That's quite a lot of replant. I built a new cellar, not one, a red cellar, white cellar, rosé cellar, barrel halls, laboratory, re-equipped the whole thing, new team, 3 years to renovate the chateau, another year and a half to renovate all the entertaining rooms, and at the same time trying to build the distribution. And I was there. I was on that road. I was so focused. We had, in 2006, bought Clos Cantenac in Saint-Emilion. It was terribly small. And this Chinaman turns up, a Hong Kong Chinaman turns up, Ken Lee, and he wants to look around. And I wasn't even there. And I get a call from the secretary or administrator, and she says, this guy's just been here for 2 hours and he wants to come back and see you. And I say, okay, no worries. And he comes back and we do the same thing, 2 hours. And he wants to taste everything. He wants to know everything. And he says to me at the end of it, I'd like to bring my boss back. And I said, okay, yeah. So who's your boss? Oh, he's Chinese. So I'm thinking, this could be a few containers of wine every year. This is quite interesting. Who's your boss? And he says, I can't tell you. I said, okay, so how's that going to work? He's going to turn up here next week, the week after, but you're not going to tell me who he is. Oh, well, he's very important. I said, yeah, we're all important. And I said, but why does he want to come? He said, he wants to buy the property. I said, have I ever told you the property's for sale? And Ken says, oh, yeah, everything's for sale. I said, no, everything's not for sale. Jack Ma turns up. Lovely guy. Lovely guy. Quite short. Lovely guy. Very charismatic. Speaks amazing, perfect English with all his mates who don't speak English. And we do the whole big tour and everything, and we taste the wines, and we go over to the chateau, just Jack and I and Ken and my wife, and we sit down, and Jack says, I want to buy the property. And I say, Ken, have you not told him? And Ken's like, oh no, everything for sale. 2 offers later, I find myself having turned him down, and I find myself arriving in Hong Kong. Ken had set up that I was going to have dinner with Jack. Telephone rings at 2:30. I just got into the hotel room from London, and Ken says, you ready for dinner? And I said, well, Ken, it's 2:30, but yeah, I'm ready. Tell me what time and where. He said, you have a Chinese visa in your passport. I said, well, yeah, I do. He said, car's going to be there in 15 minutes. We're going to the airport. You're flying up to Guangzhou to have dinner with Jack in one of his private retreats. And that's what happened. And we sat down in Jack's private retreat. And he is an amazing bloke. He really is an amazing guy. And we had a very good conversation. And we agreed that we were going to pass the property to him. And Jack asked me to continue, and I ended up doing 2 years consultancy, but I'm unemployable. And he's taken it on, and he has spent an absolute fortune on it. He's very, very passionate. He hasn't necessarily done everything that I would do, but he's done a lot of things that I wanted to do. And he's probably one of the very few Chinese that have come to Bordeaux that has lasted the course and will last the course. And good luck to him.
And that is the wine fairy tale of how an Englishman called Martin got Alibaba's Jack Ma into Bordeaux. So Martin Krajewski had a property in Bordeaux. He then got outbid on it by Jack Ma, and so decided to move into other parts of Bordeaux. And you've now got 2 properties. Let's start with the Cantenac. Tell me a little bit about why that appealed to you. Why was that one that fell into your lap?
You know, Bordeaux is Bordeaux. You go around the world and people say, "Where are you from?" Bordeaux. Oh, we're in Bordeaux, Saint-Quentin-de-Baron. Where's Saint-Quentin-de-Baron? Entre-deux-Mers. Okay. Our wines were great. You go across the Dordogne into Saint-Emilion, and it's like, Saint-Emilion. Ah, okay. Saint-Emilion Grand Cru? Ooh. People don't understand the whole classification system, but it's not that. It's not as simple as that. You know, you're on a journey. You're there, and it's like the child, in a sweet shop. It's the sweet that you can't quite reach that you aspire to, and I wanted to do something in Saint-Emilion, and in those days the market was quite different, and it was very, very closed. But we had an opportunity to buy this old small property, which was very ancient, but was really under the radar. One reason, because they hadn't bottled their wine under their own label for 25 years. They'd made the wine, they'd replanted a lot of the vineyard, they'd put it into bottle, and they'd sold it on either in barrel on vrac or on bottle, but to négoce or whatever. So it was interesting. It kind of, to me, appealed because it was very interesting. The vineyard was needed some attention, but a lot of it was in very good condition. The winery was a shed, an old shed. I mean, I'm telling you, tiny, 2 old concrete filthy tanks. But never mind that. These things can always be fixed. And it's like it's a mission, it's a challenge. I'm on that road, Saint-Emilion, and so we started, and it's like it just kind of like falls down on you, and you're trapped, and like walking in glue. You can't get away. You don't want to get away, and you all of a sudden you're in this rarefied atmosphere, and it kind of went from there. We have managed to buy a little bit. We only have 6 hectares of Saint-Emilion Grand Cru. We only started off with 1.5. We've managed to piece back bits of what were the original vineyard. There are some bits that I'd like to buy that I'll never be able to buy, and they've either been sold on, and there are other bits where I don't want to buy it. 6 hectares, it's enough. And we've done everything. We built the winery, we built the laboratory, we built the barrel hall, we've done everything. And we're making this wine, and it's Merlot. I love Bordeaux. I love right bank. I love left bank as well, but I'm on the right bank, and there's this station. And here we are. First vintage was in 2007, 25 years after their last vintage they produced, 82, the great 82. This is 21, a very complicated year, tough year. The 21s are sleeping giants. They're ugly ducklings, but they are, and this in fact is as well. They're coming out, they're turning. The wine's very linear. Merlot, it's very easy, soft, perfume, feminine. And it does what it's supposed to do. We don't make wines. We don't try to make wines to impress people. We make wines to bring pleasure, and this to me is a wine to bring pleasure. Our production in 21 is like 30 or 40% of our average year, but it's the sacrifices that you make and the extra work that you do, what you end up with. So rather than making 12,000 bottles of Clos Cantenac, you make a few thousand. But it's not important. What's important is that you're on that journey.
there is a sibling that is also part of the greater Krajewski Empire, and that is Chateau Seraphine. There's a very personal touch to the name because this speaks to your Polish heritage. You've named it obviously after you acquired it. How did Seraphine come to be?
Having done our transaction with Mr. Ma, my best friend in China, I had a little bit of money in the bank, and money does burn a hole in your pocket very, very quickly. And I'd always, probably for 20, 30 years, had loved Pomerol, but Pomerol's a mystery. You can't just rock up there and knock on the door. There are very few places that open the door. But I drunk the wines, I bought the wines, and I was fascinated by it. And it's on our doorstep. And Neil Martin, who well-known journalist, wine critic. I was reading Neil Martin's book on Pomerol, and I was getting more and more excited. And the opportunity came up through a rather surreptitious manner, where a property was going through probate, not on the market. My bank manager was dealing with it, and it was kind of a whisper in the ear. So my wife said to me one day, "Why do you keep reading that book on Pomerol? You're up to something." Yeah, I was up to something. The 85 hectares that I sold in Entre-deux-Mers to Jack Ma paid for 1 hectare in Pomerol. But it's like, where do you want to be? And we all have different opinions. I've already in a previous conversation said that Saint-Emilion's a bit bling. It's about big chateaus, and it's about I'm a tough guy and I've got more money than you are. Pomerol is just so different, so different. It's really farming. It's like the farm that I grew up on, where the family do all the work. You're responsible for everything. So we bought this a little bit, and it was called Chateau Montbrun. Chateau Montbrun, you all speak amazing French, so you can do your own touch. Chateau Montbrun literally translated Chateau My Brown. I didn't think that Chateau My Brown was going to be, really
a marketing success.
Very sexy. But my grandmother, Seraphine Ormolenska, I'd never met her, but I'd heard so much about her from my father, photographs, stories, and it was such a beautiful name. I've always thought it's a beautiful name. And I asked the syndicate in Pomerol if I could change the name. They were delighted with the name. I had to go higher into the Bordeaux authorities. They were fine. And amazingly, we'd only just arrived. We were invited to the first meeting of the syndicate, where probably 40 or 50 of the properties turn up. Pomerol's tiny, but there are a lot of properties. And everybody was like, "We are so pleased to have you here. We so love the name. We so love what you're doing. We know what you did in Entre-deux-Mers. We know what you did in Pomerol." So it's a real thrill, and and it's a family business. My daughter's involved. She's my boss. She's the winemaker. Thanks Buller Herber, because he got her into it. My son Matthew had involvement. He did his DNO in Bordeaux, his master's. He did his stage at Petrus and Fontenoy before the Mouex broke up the properties. He knows the ground. He now runs a biodynamic maraîchère, a fruit and vegetable farm in Switzerland. He's very into the eco and the biodynamic and the soil and sustainability and everything. So we all have a part in it, and that's the magic. It's family, and it's Pomerol, and we were able to start, if you like, with a clean sheet. We made it a clean sheet, and in a very short period of time, I think we're kind of on the radar. It's 100% Merlot. We do have Cabernet Franc. I planted Cabernet Franc. I bought 2.2 hectares. 0.2 hectares is important in Pomerol. It costs a lot of money. We replanted 75%, 50% immediately, 25% more after 3 years. The Cabernet Franc's coming into the wines now. Probably not into the first wine for another couple of years. But Pomerol has this amazing difference. It's unique. It's like a beautiful woman. It's just captivating in every sense. More black fruit than there is red. Black plums, black cherries, confected fruit, hedgerow areas, but then all the underlying nuances, the spices, the flavors, the tobacco box, and you know, the longer you look and stare, the more you find. And it's not a question that you have to find anything by any stretch of the imagination, but it's about, again, you know, I keep coming back to it, it's about precision and love, and it's about the tiny little things that you do. I don't make the wine. My daughter makes the wine. We did have Savage and Buller Herber in the cellar in 2018. You know, they rock up at 11 o'clock in the morning having drunk 20 magnums of wine the night before and ask if they can help, and everybody goes, "Oh, what? Don't touch anything." But again, you know, that's the story of Seraphine. You know, we are on the landscape. We are in that little elite bunch. Maybe we're top 10, top 12, if you want to be crude and measure it on press reviews, scores, and the price that we sell the wine for. That isn't necessary, you know, but it is a benchmark, and it's our journey, and it's a journey that we're on.
Well, cheers to that. I know
Cheers.
you mentioned earlier that you sometimes feel the tap of your father on your shoulder when you're walking alone through the vineyards. I think your grandmother might be doing something similar. I think she'd be very proud to have her name attached to a wonderful estate and be part of this great story.
Thanks, Dan. It's a connection with the past, and it's a story that goes into the future.
Seraphine, cheers.
Cheers.